What's good, y'all? It's your boy Having final round. We about to break this fight down with Canelo Alvarez versus Bivol. I'm excited for this. I'm excited for this fight. We gonna do a breakdown. We'll get into some film studies later. I'll have those posted later in the week. But yeah, this is gonna be a good matchup. It's gonna be fun. My dream matchup would have been Canelo versus Bivol, but I think if we're patient, we might see a light heavyweight undisputed matchup if Canelo can get past Bivol and Bivol can get past Joe Smith Jr. We might see that fight actually go down, and this would be for all the marbles, which would make it that much more exciting. So even though I didn't get the dream matchup, I think there's a good chance that we might potentially see that in the future. So I can't complain too much. And I like this fight a lot more than the Makabu fight. I think currently fans today, right, appreciate this fight with Bivol. I think fans today are more familiar with Bivol than Makabu, even though I understand the weight of going all the way up to cruiserweight to get a strap. That would have been very impressive for Canelo Alvarez on his resume in the long term and his legacy. I understand that. But once again, I think currently today boxing fans will appreciate this fight with Bivol a lot more than that Makabu fight. And I think Bivol can present a little bit more issues than Makabu. But, you know, if that fight with Bivol manifests, that's one of the few people that I think, the only person at this point that I think can beat Canelo Alvarez. I think Bivol is going to be a bigger version of Triple G. I really do. And we saw what happened in the fights with Triple G and Canelo. A lot of people would argue that Canelo lost the first fight with Triple G, and that was little old Triple G. So imagine Bivol, who's the Mike Myers of boxing. You saw him against Marcus Brown, had a big old gash in his head, blood dropping down his face, and it didn't stop him. Once again, he was like Mike Myers. He just keeps coming and coming and coming. He might be slow, but he just keeps coming and coming. He cuts off the ring very effectively. He puts pressure. He doesn't wave caution to the air. His body shots and combinations are absolutely phenomenal. His punch placement is phenomenal. He's a very patient fighter. He actually understands positioning very, very well. You know, he doesn't get enough credit for his boxing IQ or his boxing skills within being a pressure fighter. He actually has some pretty good angles that he utilizes in fights. But you saw what he did to Marcus Brown, absolutely drowning him, even though his face was all gashed up and blood all over, getting in the way of his vision. Most fighters get very discouraged with a cut like that, and he just kept on coming forward and forward and forward and breaking Marcus Brown down throughout that fight. So I think he would present a lot of issues to Canelo Alvarez. Like I said, we saw what Triple G was able to do. Okay, obviously Triple G at this point is no threat to Canelo. I think Canelo knocks out Triple G at this point in his career. But I'm talking the first two fights. And Triple G didn't even go down to the body the way he usually does against Canelo. Now, that's a testament to Canelo, right? Because when you go up against a good boxer, he's not going to give you those body punches. He's not going to give you those body shots. You know, I'm going to go off on a tangent here, but that's what I'm trying to tell some of these EJ fans. Like, yeah, you're impressed with this victory against Ugas. That's all nice and gravy, but Ugas is stuck in the mud. Ugas has no feet. Ugas has to set his feet before he throws punches. He was a sitting target for EJ, and even then, he gave EJ a lot of problems in the early rounds. There was adjustments in the sense that EJ had to settle down and commit to what he does, which is put pressure. I mean, Ugas had EJ on the back foot, for Christ's sakes, in the first few rounds. Until EJ realized, like, I can't keep on boxing like this. I got to do what I know how to do. And it just worked because Ugas he's going to be there for those shots. He doesn't have the footwork. Ugas is a far cry from Bud. You know, if you think Bud is going to be there for those body shots against EJ, you're crazy. And even if he is, there's going to be counters waiting right back at him. You know, and if EJ doesn't have those body shots, how does he beat Crawford? How does he slow Crawford down? You know, and that was the same thing that happened with Triple G. You know, Triple G did not put in enough body work. And if he's not going to put in enough body work against a guy who's a body snatcher, how you expect to win that fight in the later rounds? And I think Beterbiev is not going to make that mistake. I think that Beterbiev is going to put that body work in. And, you know, obviously Triple G is not going to be as enthusiastic as he usually is to take those shots downstairs. Once again, when you're facing a good boxer who can counter very well. But let's get into it. Bivol versus Alvarez. You know, Bivol, he can be tricky in this fight. I think that he can present some issues. He may even win some rounds. I think he'll be a lot more effective in terms of this fleet-footed style, right? This fleet-footed style that Caleb Plant tried to execute, Billy Joe Saunders, Amir Khan, guys like that, right? I think he'll be a lot more effective. One of my favorite fights to watch Bivol is against Jean Pascal. You know, and I'll explain that. I enjoyed watching Bivol through that fight because I saw him pretty much highlight what he does best and utilize all the skills he has. Okay, he controlled distance very well. His jab looked very good that night. He was throwing combinations. He was countering, pulling back and countering. You know, he was feinting. He was on point that night. Now, Jean Pascal is a far cry from Canelo Alvarez, but nonetheless, I liked what he did in that fight. But here's my problem with Bivol. He's a Russian fighter, and he has a very amateurish style. Not amateur in the sense that it's not effective, right? Or it's like unprofessional. It's just that it's a style based within the amateur ranks, okay? Especially within Russian fighting. You know, that very in and out, on your toes, you know, type thing. Very 1, 2, 3, very basic shit. Okay, and my other thing about Russian fighters, they're pretty straight up and down. You know, yeah, they can be very good at what they do, whatever it is they do, okay? But once you kind of get past that first layer, once you peel that first layer back, there's nothing really left. You saw that with Andre Ward versus Sergey Kovalev. You know, once Andre Ward started to peel that layer back on Kovalev, once he got past that big right hand, that jab and that cross, it was like, okay, what you got left? And there wasn't much left because Andre Ward is a multi-dimensional fighter. Andre Ward can fight off the front, the back foot, in the pocket. He can get dirty with you and grimy. You know, he's a switch hitter himself. You know, Andre Ward is a multi-dimensional fighter. And once he figured out Kovalev, there was nothing much left there. And you guys know my rule of thumb. I don't buy into one-dimensional fighters beating multi-dimensional fighters, no matter how good that one gear of a fighter is. No matter how good it is. I will never choose a one-geared fighter over a multi-dimensional fighter. I'm not doing it. Please stop. It's going to be the same thing with EJ versus Bud. Y'all are going to understand this and you're going to learn it eventually. You're going to understand it eventually. There's levels to this mental game of boxing. There's levels to it. So, to me, Canelo is a multi-dimensional fighter. I've seen him fight in various ways. So once he gets Bivol's, and it's not even going to be so much that Canelo needs to make adjustments throughout this fight. I don't think he's going to need to make too many adjustments. I think he's going to do what he enjoys doing because stylistically, this is why this matchup is kind of favorable for him. He's going to get to put pressure. He's going to get to cut off the ring. He's going to get to rip Bivol down to the body. He's going to try to get him out of there in the later rounds. He may give up the first few rounds. He's going to try to probe and figure out what's going on with the timing and the rhythm of Bivol. But once he does that, I think it will be all downhill for Bivol. And I don't think Bivol is the type of fighter who's going to be able to go into his back pocket and pull out a bunch of different tricks or make a bunch of different adjustments. He's not going to be able to do it. Once Canelo figures him out, what is he going to be left with? What is he going to be left with? How is he going to make an adjustment? And here's the scary part for him. Even if he does make an adjustment, Canelo Alvarez will probably be able to make adjustment off of that adjustment. And he could probably make 2 more if he needed to. You know, Bivol, he's a pretty straight up and down dude. And, I would really love his style if he went down to the body more. And that, to me, is the deal breaker for this fight and to why I'm choosing Canelo Alvarez. Because if you're not going to match Canelo Alvarez's body shots, especially being a mover, and being a mover can be great, right? It can be a huge asset, but it can be turned against you really quickly. It can exponentially wear you down and wear your cardio down throughout a fight if you got somebody who's ripping you downstairs. So, Bivol does not go down to the body from what I've seen, okay? He'll throw a jab and a cross from time to time, but it's not consistent body work. And I don't know how he stays in the fight for the later rounds against Canelo Alvarez and how he keeps up if he's not going to put that body work in. How do you slow Canelo down? How do you keep yourself in the fight? You got to match his body attack. He has the right ingredients to make it a difficult fight. He's got good footwork. He can move. I think he's going to have a lot more power than some of the guys, the bigger guys that Canelo has faced, like Caleb Plant. He'll have more power than Caleb Plant, respectable power, than Billy Joe Saunders. And I think that can work in Bivol's favor. I think he can cause some issues. I think it'll be a little bit of an adjustment period for Canelo. But ultimately, because he does not put in enough body work, it's going to come back to haunt him in the later rounds. And I do think Canelo can get him out of there. TKO or KO. I think he can get him out of there. So... Bivol's got a good counter, left hook, pulling back. His jab is kind of hit and miss in some fights. Some fights it looks really good. Some fights it looks okay. But it's pretty straightforward. I'm not seeing you utilize that hand, that lead hand in all types of variations. I don't see it in some of his past fights. I don't see him utilizing that jab in so many different ways, which is going to be very important to keep Canelo at bay. And I think having that in and out jumpy style can put him at risk for getting timed as he's coming in. So I do think Bivol, this stylistic matchup is a favorable one for Canelo. And we got to remember, you guys, just because Canelo gives up a few rounds in the beginning of the fight doesn't mean he's not the ring general. Doesn't mean he's not in control of the fight. Doesn't mean he's particularly losing. Now, don't get it twisted. If the fight keeps going on and Bivol's still having success landing or, sticking and moving, okay, throughout the fight, and it's getting to the 10th, 11th round, and he's maintaining that, then, yeah, there's going to be a cause for concern for Canelo. But we have to get this idea out. We saw this with Bud versus Porter. We saw this with Canelo versus Caleb Plant. Sometimes we see it with Lomachenko. Sometimes fighters will give up a few rounds. And we saw with Canelo, they will give you a few rounds to set up their game, to probe you, to figure out what's going on here, to get your timing down. You got to understand that boxing, if you're truly elite, you have to be deeper on a mental level. You have to play mind games. You have to be a trickster. You almost have to walk your opponent towards a cliff without them even knowing. Guys like Bud, Canelo, they understand how to do that. They understand how to be patient. They understand how to get the sleight of hand. They know how to manipulate you, let you think you're winning. But most importantly, they're calm and they're composed enough to understand I'm setting up my game for the later part of the fight. And I'm setting up my game to get that knockout or that TKO or to completely take over the fight. A lot of people said Porter was beating Bud. No, he wasn't. Maybe on the scorecards. In a sense, maybe on the scorecards. A lot of people said the thing about Caleb Plant and Canelo. He was up on the scorecards for a few rounds. Some people wouldn't, right? But some people actually argued that Caleb Plant may have been up on the scorecards on points. And maybe he was. Or think about Floyd Mayweather versus Conor McGregor. Conor McGregor, you can make an argument that Conor McGregor was up on the scorecards against Floyd Mayweather. But was he ever in control of the fight? No. Conor McGregor was and that's the perfect example, actually. Conor McGregor versus Floyd Mayweather. Conor McGregor was never in control of that fight. Even if you technically had him winning on the scorecards on points, which you could say, technically, you could say, he was never in control of that fight. And he was never going to win that fight. Mayweather knew what he was doing. Mayweather knew what he was setting up. Mayweather knew he was probing, just letting this guy shoot his load and getting his timing down to when the time was right to take over, he was going to knock shit out the park. Same with Bud versus Porter. Same with Canelo versus some of his opposition like Caleb Plant or Billy Joe Saunders or Amir Khan. So we need to stop with this. When we're watching elite fighters and automatically assuming because they lose a few rounds that they're down, they're losing the fight, they're not in control, or, they're ineffective. Canelo Alvarez might fall down on the scorecards for the first few rounds, you guys. Now we have to pay very careful attention to the body work of both men. And we got to pay attention to how Bivol is moving in the later rounds. But do not be fooled because Bivol gets up on the scorecards, if he gets up on the scorecards early on. Canelo will set up his game. And it's going to be a matter of how much can Bivol sustain. If he's not going to put in body work himself and he's going to take the Caleb Plant approach, how much punishment can he take? And how long can he maintain his feet throughout that fight? But I really think Canelo's going to do what he does best. He's going to break him down. And I don't think Bivol's going to make enough adjustments or change his rhythm and timing in this fight to cause problems. Because that's a big thing that you need to do against Canelo Alvarez. You have to show him different looks. You have to change your timing, your rhythm, and tempo. And I think Bivol is just kind of stuck in one thing. And once you peel that layer back, what is Bivol left with? Like I said, Andre Ward versus Sergey Kovalev. Once Andre Ward got past that jab, that right hand, and that fear of power, there was nothing left with Sergey. He completely stripped him naked and threw him out in the middle of a cold. So I think that's what's going to happen in this fight. I really do. So tell me what you guys think. Like the video, comment down below. I'm going to come out with some film studies. I'll talk about what I believe Bivol needs to do. And I think it's pretty straightforward what Canelo's going to do for this fight. But, look, we can never sleep on the underdogs all the time. Look what Kambosos did against Teofimo Lopez. I did a little bit of film study, not as much as I should have, but I did a little bit of film study on Kambosos versus Teofimo Lopez. And I didn't see some of the things that Kambosos did in that fight. Did I see Kambosos fight off the back foot from time to time? Yes. But to box that masterfully like he did against Teofimo Lopez, off the back foot the way he did, that totally came out of nowhere. Or maybe I shouldn't say completely nowhere, but, and obviously the stars aligned. Teofimo was going through some stuff, dealing with some personal problems, and, everything aligned perfectly for Kambosos. But Kambosos stepped up, and Kambosos showed why he is, some people would call him undisputed. And regardless of whether you think that or not, he won all the belts, and he won them for a reason, because he's a dynamic fighter, and he proved that, because that's what it took to win the belts. He showed a lot of different shades to his game, and sometimes you just don't know what a fighter might bring out. You might not know what they're truly capable of till they actually get in there and do it. So who knows? Maybe Bivol goes down to the body in this fight. Maybe Bivol shows a different dimension. Maybe he's more aggressive. Maybe he does something we completely unexpect. But just based off of the body of work I've seen from Bivol and based off of my rule of thumbs, I just have to go with my parameters and my assessment based off of the information I have. And I believe that Bivol is going to be one-dimensional in this fight. He has a really good dimension. He's effective at what he does, but I believe it won't be enough to get the job done against Canelo Alvarez, who's the pound-for-pound king currently in boxing. So like I said, cheers to my subscribers. Cheers to new ones in the future. Tell me what you think. Comment down below. Like the video. If you have any film studies you want me to do with Canelo or Bivol, let me know and I'll post them. Get at it.